Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you will find stuff probably unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group with a large membership, and best of all, we're friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
My name is Leonard Ernest Reed. I was known by everyone who knew me as Nipper Reed. I was born in Nottingham on the 31st of March in 1925. During my working life, I was a policeman and rose to the rank of Chief Superintendent of the Metropolitan Police's Murder Squad. I led the investigation into the arrest and eventual conviction of the Kray twins and their firm in 1968 and 1969. Away from my police work, my passion was boxing, and I became a boxing administrator, a position I held for many years. Here is my story. In the previous part, I had been discussing the famous Tommy Butler, the detective chief superintendent at Scotland Yard, how he was a great detective but had one serious flaw. He was too private and always kept everything to himself. He was a brilliant investigator and plotted things up beautifully, but he would never consult with his team and did everything in his power to be clandestine. On the other hand, the other first-class sergeant of Frank Gloyne, a good solid detective, was everything a senior officer should have been towards a young detective. He showed me how to fill out reports, prepare case papers for court, and to interrogate suspects. As a first-class sergeant at Paddington, he was assured of further promotion until, that is, he became involved defending a fellow officer in disciplinary proceedings. It did for his career. Curiously, the case also involved Bert Hannam. Hannam had it in for a sergeant at Harrow Road with whom he had had an argument and eventually charged him with the disciplinary offence of unlawfully consorting with criminals. He was under police regulations, entitled to have a friend appear with him at the inquiry. Now, in those days, it was just about impossible for a CID officer not to consort with criminals. They were our eyes and ears for what jobs might be going off, and when they had gone off, who might be involved. The officer went to Frank and asked him if he would be his friend and appear for him at the disciplinary hearing. As was customary, Frank checked it out with his superiors that it would not be held against him in his career and was assured it would not have any effect on his promotion prospects. The officer was found guilty and required to resign, but Frank appealed the case to the Home Secretary, and the man was reinstated. From then on, Frank's possibilities of promotion were zero. He was moved almost immediately from Paddington, not even sideways but downwards to Highbury Vale, then something of a backwater, and there he stagnated whilst junior officers were promoted over him. Eventually, he handed in his papers before completing his full tour, a scandalous waste. I did not hear of him for some years until I was appointed national coordinator of the regional crime squads. One day, my staff officer met him and Frank asked to be remembered to me. After he left the job, he had set up a firm of builders and was by then a millionaire driving a smart new Rolls-Royce. I was not surprised, since without the prejudice and venom which had been directed at him, he would have gone to the top in the force. Quite by chance, I spoke to him in December 1990 and asked him what he thought he would have achieved had he stayed on. Well, he replied, it's difficult to tell. I may have got to be chief inspector or maybe superintendent, but I'll tell you this, Nipper, I wouldn't have got a roller, would I? As for the officer he defended, Hannum had been right, because later the man ended up with a prison sentence after being found guilty of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Hannum gave evidence in that trial as well. Curiously and sadly, when the man was released, some officers regarded him as something of a hero and Hannum as the villain. At the time, the police station was very different from the modern block it is today. It was a very old-fashioned red brick Victorian building in the Edgware Road at the junction with Bishop's Bridge Road. The station fronted onto the street, but down the side was a passageway. And you went into a big yard, which was all stables. One part had been designed as the ostlers' quarters, and this was now the CID office. The mounted branch still occupied one upstairs room, and the others were for the DI and the DS. Downstairs was an office we, the DCs, all shared. The conditions were really terrible. It was one big room, with one little office which the first-class sergeant had, and we sat all the way round the other. It was always filthy with dust and dirt from the horses who were exercised in the yard outside. It really wasn't workable, and I don't suppose the unions would accept it nowadays. It was a station long overdue for reconstruction, but it was by far the busiest on the division. We also policed a very different type of area from today. It was cosmopolitan, but it was an Italian and Irish area rather than the Arab quarter it has become. Halfway down the Harrow Road was the old Metropolitan Music Hall, where I would pop in the Stalls bar for a drink with Mr. Vasco, the manager, who was always immaculately dressed in stiff white collar and tie. He was a most polite man and good company. Together we would have a tot and watch Carol Levis's Discoveries with Violet Pretty and Ronnie Carroll, Paul Raymond's Soldiers in Skirts with Larry Grayson, and best of all, Max Miller. It wasn't time wasted. You could never tell which of the faces from the wanted posters on the station walls might be there, and I was lucky enough to bag 3 of them. One was a man wanted for an extensive series of frauds, who even then tried to explain to me that an arrest inside a music hall was illegal. Another was a man whom I had seen at Paddington Police Station, where he had been arrested for stealing a wallet from a chauffeur's pocket whilst he was cleaning a car. There was his picture on the wall with the caption that he was wanted for stealing a typewriter. Not many days later, I found him in the stalls at the Metropolitan. He was sent for sentence at the old Inner London Sessions, where because of his record, he received 14 years imprisonment under the Preventive Detention Act, which was still in force. The third was a Glasgow hard man wanted in Scotland for his part in a protection racket. Because of pressure from the local bobbies, he had decided to hide away in London for a while. He was just having a night out at the Metropolitan when I ran into him. All in all, Paddington had a better class of crime than Harlesden, but there were still some amusing incidents. One of them involved a prostitute, an olive-skinned beauty, who whizzed a lorry driver out of his wallet with about £40 in it. He came in to tell a fairly familiar story that he had met this girl in the Bayswater Road, which in those days was lined with prostitutes. She had taken him to a place in Lancaster Mews, and I can't believe it, he said. She was such a nice girl and the best screw I ever had. There was no difficulty in finding the girl. She was very attractive, slim figure, small, beautiful features, who looked part Asian and made no protest when I took her back to the Nick and said she had to be charged. I don't really know what made me question the sex. I just had a feeling all was not quite right. Eventually, I said I would call the matron to search her, and she said, lowering big brown eyes, "I think you'd better do it yourself." It was then the thing became unstuck, and I realized he was a man known as Saul. The lorry driver was dumbfounded. "If you hadn't told me, I wouldn't believe it now," he said. Months later, I met Saul again. I was in Marylebone Court, and there was an inspector who had charged him with soliciting. I said, "Hello, Sam. What have you nicked him for?" He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "He's a fellow. You should do him for importuning, not soliciting." "Bollocks," he said. "Yes," I said, "that's what you'll find if you make him drop his panties." It was at Paddington that I first met Jack Comer, also known as Jack Spot, because he was always on the spot when he was needed to prevent trouble. The year 1956 saw the end of him as a major force in London's underworld. Known then as a hard man, he had been around since before the war. During the time of Sir Oswald Mosley's fascist marches throughout the East End, Spot had been employed by the wealthy Jewish element to provide resistance, and in his memoirs, he wrote proudly of the battles he had waged with the Blackshirts. One bloody encounter, known as the Battle of Cable Street, convinced the authorities they had to take some action, and further marches by the fascists were banned. Spot became the hero of the East End, turning his popularity to good advantage by offering Jewish shopkeepers and clubs his protection. He also ran Spielers, and after the war became controller of the bookmaking pitches on the free side of many point-to-point meetings and racecourses. These he let off to bookmakers who wanted to set up a stand. It was a lucrative business, and he became a wealthy man. By the 1950s, he was one of the two self-styled kings of the underworld. The other was Billy Hill, and was something of a grand old man. He had mellowed since his early days, had married a beautiful Irish girl, Rita, and now was well-groomed with well-tailored, usually brown suits, a brown fedora hat, and handmade shoes. He would leave his flat, walk across the road to his barber's, and then down to the Cumberland Hotel, where, at a corner table in the beer garden, he would hold court, offering advice and wisdom to anyone who sought it. He looked like a successful businessman. He seemed to have modeled himself on the American mafioso Frank Costello, but he had neither that man's intellectual power nor his political connections. In August 1955, he had been involved in the celebrated knife fight in Soho with Albert Dimes, Hill's right-hand man. Hill was tired of Spot's control of the bookmaking pitches, and this was a direct challenge for them. It was a fight which never was. Both men were charged with a fray and were acquitted following the perjured testimony of an old and senile vicar, Basil Andrews. He said, by chance, he had been passing and had witnessed the whole incident. He gave evidence which favored Spot, who was acquitted. The Crown felt it could not continue with the case against Dimes. Later, Andrews admitted he had been given £14 for his perjured evidence. He again appeared at the Old Bailey, this time giving evidence for the Crown against his bribers. By now, Billy Hill had more or less retired and was about to head for Tangier. He wrote his memoirs, entitled King of the Underworld, and Spot was foolish enough to do the same, giving his preferred version of life in Soho to the Daily Mirror, and also having it published by the Olympia Press in Paris with an introduction by Hank Jansen. Outside his own little empire, Spot had not been a popular man for some years, and now he had annoyed even more people. It was also thought that he should be sharing some of his spoils from bookmakers' pitches with other deserving enterprises. Indeed, he had hired the Krays for a day at the Epsom Spring meeting when, it was rumored, Billy Hill had been lining others up for an on-course battle. the spring of 1956, Spot had known he was in trouble because he had been coming to the Paddington police station asking to see Peter Beveridge to give him police protection. But the rumors were vague, and Beveridge was unable to act unless there was more concrete information. In fact, he told Spot to stay away until he had evidence and was prepared to share it with him. When he got nowhere with Beveridge, he would come to me, saying, "Nipper, they're definitely going to get me." I would listen and indeed sympathize, but there was really no way I could help him. If the chief super had turned him away, there was nothing a detective constable could do. As a betting man, he must have known it was 6-4 on, that he would eventually become a victim, but it was impossible to offer him protection in a situation which he had manufactured for himself. But Jack was right. He had been so worried, he had thought of retiring and buying a small pub. Around 9:30 p.m., on the 2nd of May 1956, when he returned with Rita from looking at a possible purchase, the Little Western, off Parade Street, to his flat in Hyde Park Mansions, he was attacked by a group of men and was badly slashed. Spot was hit with a Schiller leg and knocked to the ground. As he fell, one of his attackers stepped in and gave him a final slash across the face, which caused the worst of his wounds. True to tradition, by the time he had been given over 100 stitches at St. Mary's Hospital, he was able to say, "It was all over in seconds. I couldn't recognize a soul." Rita was made of sterner stuff. She was prepared to name names, and she did so. Billy Hill had wielded the shillelagh, ironically given to him by Spot in happier days. The other attackers, she said, included Albert Dimes, Bobby Warren, and Frank Fraser. Jock McCulver sent me with another sergeant, Fred Byers, to make the arrests. Billy Hill, short, slim, and with his hair greased and pasted back, looking every inch a spiv of the 1950s, was unconcerned. It was just as if he had expected a pull. He took his time getting dressed and smartening himself up even more. Just before we left his small flat in a nondescript block in Moscow Road, Bayswater, he went to a sideboard, opened a cupboard, and took out a roll of notes which would have choked a pig. "I suppose I'd better bring a few quid just in case," he said as we took him away. I have no doubt that during his career, Hill had some very senior officers in his pocket, and I don't think Spotty did. That was the difference between them. I was involved in the inquiry from the beginning, and I never heard any senior officer saying, "Poor old Jack, my friend Jack." In my mind at that time, anybody who achieved superiority in the criminal world had useful friends in the police. Albert Dimes, who lived in Clerkenwell, was equally unconcerned, and rightly so. Both he and Hill had alibis and were never charged. Frankie Fraser had left for Ireland until the trouble died down, and so McCulver set a trap. He let it be known that the heat was off, and Fraser was not amongst the men wanted. Sure enough, within a few days, we had word Frankie was on his way back. We went in 3 cars, 2 of which broke down on the way, to London Airport, and by the time we arrived, the passengers had disembarked. We looked around desperately, and I saw him, suitcase in hand, at the bottom of an escalator. His face was livid when it dawned upon him that he had been duped. Bobby Warren was arrested a short time later, and he and Fraser appeared at the Old Bailey in June. Spot refused to give evidence and was merely produced as an exhibit to show the scars resulting from his 180 stitches. Rita was the main prosecution witness and did her stuff. She coolly faced Patrick Marinan, an Irishman who had a boxing blue, parrying his questions. She stuck by her story, denying that she had named Hill merely to get rid of him and leave the crown of the underworld on her husband's head. Fraser and Warren were each sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. It was my job to get Spot and Rita back to the safety of their flat, because Billy Hill, who had been watching the trial, was not pleased. He believed the law should not intervene in these domestic disputes. It was the first time I had the experience of driving in a police car through London at top speed, blue light flashing and headlights on. 3 more of Spot's attackers were subsequently arrested, including Billy Blythe, who refused to stand on an identification parade. On conviction, on 16th October, he was sentenced to 5 years and later died in prison. His funeral was one of the most spectacular of gangland funerals. Meanwhile, McIlver thought there would be reprisals, and so had Spot's flat watched. But when the counterattack came, it was in a very different way. On the 20th of June, Tommy Falco, a close friend of Hill and Dimes, alleged that Spot had attacked him outside Bertie Green's Astor Club, a smart night spot just off Berkeley Square. He had received wounds requiring 47 stitches in his arm. The police had been outside Spot's flat that night and had not seen him leave, but when another man, Johnny Rice, went to the police station to corroborate Falco's story, Jack was arrested. The trial was one of the more interesting of the time because Victor Scarface Jock Russo came forward to say he had been offered the then considerable sum of £500 to allow himself to be slashed and to say Spot was responsible. Hill himself gave evidence to say this allegation was ridiculous, but Mr. Justice Streetfield, summing up to the jury, commented, "Among these gentry, if they can be called that, they appear to have their own methods of dealing with those who displease them. It might afford a background for what has been called a frame-up." Spot, ably defended by Victor Durand, was acquitted. Shortly after that, a club Jack owned in partnership in Bayswater was firebombed, and he drifted away from the scene, taking work in a meat-packing factory. Years later, in the second Kray inquiry, I was to see Spot to try to get some piece of concrete evidence on which I could work. By now, he had split with Rita and had clearly been on hard times. Otherwise, he hadn't changed that much. There was still the well-cut suit and the smart brown fedora. He could still talk a good fight, asserting he had taught the twins all they know. "You know what did me, Nipper?" he asked. "The papers. All that king of the underworld stuff. It was the worst day's work I ever did. Nobody even knew me before that. And then suddenly everybody's trying to put one on me. That was my big mistake, Nipper. Publicity." Thank you for listening. That's all for this edition. I'll see you in the next one soon.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.